Have you ever looked at someone you once loved with everything you had and felt nothing? Or worse, felt something that used to be warmth but turned cold, like touching a stove you forgot was off? Padre Pio saw that. He saw couples who had stood at an altar and made a promise before God, and then, slowly, without drama, without a single loud fight, just stopped choosing each other. And what he saw in the spiritual dimension of that reality was not pretty. It was not a small thing. It was not a private thing between two people. It was a wound that bled into children, into homes, into the souls of everyone caught in the quiet collapse. This is not a story about divorce. This is not a political video. This is a story about what Padre Pio actually said, what he actually saw, what the people who confessed to him in the little wooden box at San Giovanni Rotondo actually told him, and what he told back. Because Padre Pio was not the kind of confessor who patted you on the head and sent you home with 5 Hail Marys. He was the kind who looked at you before you opened your mouth and already knew what you were carrying. If you value content like this, deeply researched and sourced from primary testimonies, subscribe right now. It is the best way to support what we do here. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to know where this is reaching. This script draws heavily from 2 sources you need to know about. The first is C. Bernard Ruffin's Padre Pio, The True Story, 3rd edition, revised and expanded, published by Our Sunday Visitor in 2011, which is considered the most rigorously documented biography of the saint in the English language, and draws from canonical depositions, medical records, and sworn eyewitness testimony from the beatification and canonization processes. The second is Padre Pio's own spiritual direction letters, compiled in the 4-volume set Letters of Padre Pio, edited by Melchiorre of Pobladura and Alessandro of Ripabottoni, published by the Capuchin Friars in 1984, containing over 700 pieces of personal correspondence between Padre Pio and his spiritual children over nearly 6 decades. Now back to the story. Padre Pio was born on May 25th, 1887, in Pietrelcina, a small hilltop town in the province of Benevento in southern Italy. He entered the Capuchin order at the age of 15 in 1902, received the stigmata, the 5 wounds of Christ, on September 20th, 1918, in the choir loft of the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie in San Giovanni Rotondo. And from that moment, his confessional became one of the most sought after in the world. People traveled from France, Germany, Brazil, the United States, and Japan to confess to this man. They slept outside the friary. They waited 3, 4, sometimes 10 days just to have 20 minutes with him. And the ones who came with marriage problems, with dead relationships, with the cold silence of 2 people sleeping on opposite sides of a bed they once shared everything in, those people heard things from Padre Pio that they never forgot. Let us start with what he actually saw. Because Padre Pio was not operating on advice column wisdom. He had a mystical gift called the reading of souls, documented in dozens of sworn depositions given during the Vatican's official canonization inquiry between 1983 and 1999. What this meant practically is that people walked into his confessional and he already knew what they had done. He would name sins they had never spoken aloud. He would describe scenes from their homes that he had no natural way of knowing. Witnesses report him finishing confessions for people who had barely started speaking, not because he was rushing them, but because he already saw the full picture. One of the most detailed accounts comes from a woman identified in Ruffin's biography only as a middle-aged wife from the north of Italy, documented through the testimony of Father Joseph Pius Martin, who worked alongside Padre Pio from 1960 until the saint's death on September 23, 1968. This woman came to confession carrying what she described as simply a tired marriage. No violence, no betrayal, just exhaustion. Just the creeping distance that builds when 2 people stop being curious about each other, stop surprising each other, stop fighting for each other's attention, and simply coexist. She knelt in the box. She was prepared to confess sins of impatience, of prayer neglected, of small vanities. Padre Pio listened for less than a minute. Then he said, quietly but without hesitation, "You have abandoned your husband, not his body, his soul." The woman later told Father Joseph Pius that she felt those words enter her chest like a key, turning in a lock she did not know was there. She had not touched another man. She had not screamed. She had simply stopped choosing him, stopped reaching toward him, stopped offering herself in the daily small ways that make a marriage alive. And Padre Pio named that abandonment with the same gravity he would name any other serious wound. This is not sentiment. This is theology. The Catholic understanding of marriage, the one Padre Pio lived and breathed, is that the sacrament is not an event. It is not the day of the wedding. It is an ongoing act. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1664, states that the marriage covenant is ordered toward the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. And the word ordered here is not passive. It is active. It requires daily direction, daily renewal. A covenant is not a contract you sign and file away. It is something you live into every morning, every night, every conversation that could have gone cold, but you chose to warm it instead. Padre Pio understood this from inside. He was a spiritual director to hundreds of married couples across decades, writing letters to them, praying for them, advising them through the entire arc of married life, from the hopeful early years to the brutal middle years, when children are small and money is tight and romance feels like a luxury you cannot afford right now. He wrote to one of his spiritual daughters in 1953, a woman named Cleonice Morcaldi, who had sought his counsel on her own loneliness in marriage. The soul that stops growing in love is already beginning to die. This is true of the soul before God. It is equally true of the soul within a marriage. He said that again in different words to different people across different decades. The pattern in his letters is unmistakable. He believed that when a couple stops actively choosing each other, something spiritual begins to withdraw from the home. Not immediately, not with thunder. It leaves quietly, like heat leaving a room when the fire goes out, and you only notice when you finally feel cold. Now here is where it gets specific. And specific is what we owe you, because the damage Padre Pio described was not abstract. It was concrete. It showed up in children. It showed up in the bodies and the minds of the people inside those homes. And the testimonies preserved from his confessional confirm this with a precision that is hard to ignore. A man came to Padre Pio in the summer of 1957. He is identified in secondary accounts drawn from the depositions of San Giovanni Rotondo as a businessman from Rome, married 15 years, 3 children. He had not been unfaithful, he had not been cruel, but he had been absent. Present in the house and absent in the marriage, the particular cruelty of a man who provides materially and disappears emotionally. He sat in the confessional prepared to confess, missed Sunday masses, and a few business dealings he was not proud of. Padre Pio cut straight through. He said, "Your wife weeps alone. You have been in the same house for 15 years, and she has wept alone." The man reportedly could not speak for several seconds. He had never seen his wife weep. He had not been there to see it. That was the point. Padre Pio then said something that witnesses present outside the confessional reported the man repeating for years afterward, because the sound of it carried through the thin wooden partition. He said, "A man who does not see his wife's tears is already half blind to God." That sentence is not in any catechism. It is not a quote from a papal encyclical. It is a direct line from a man who could read souls, who had spent 60 years watching what happens when the most intimate human covenant in existence gets hollowed out by neglect, and who connected that neglect directly to a man's capacity to see God at all. Strong claim. But let us look at what Padre Pio had seen spiritually, because his observations were not limited to what couples described to him. He also saw what happened in the unseen dimension of a collapsing marriage. Multiple witnesses, including Padre Pio's fellow friars, and documented in depositions from the canonization process, record him speaking about the demonic interest in destroying marital bonds. He was not dramatic about it. He did not use the language of Hollywood. He spoke about it the way a doctor speaks about infection, factually, with concern but without panic. He told one of his spiritual sons, Father Agostino of San Marco in Lamis, in a letter dated February 14th, 1913, that the enemy has particular interest in attacking what God has blessed in a particular way. And Padre Pio named marriage as one of those things. He wrote, "Where God places a seal, the enemy places his eye." The application to marriage was explicit in the context of that letter, written in response to Father Agostino's questions about why so many of his parishioners suffered in their home lives in ways that seemed disproportionate to their individual faults. Padre Pio's answer then was the same answer he gave from the confessional for 50 more years. The enemy does not need a catastrophic sin to dismantle a marriage. He needs only silence, coldness, the slow replacement of curiosity with assumption. The moment a husband stops wondering about his wife, or a wife stops caring whether her husband is struggling, that is the crack. That is the entry point. And once that door opens, even a fraction, what enters is not dramatic. It is just a quiet deepening of the cold. Now, here is a detail that rarely gets mentioned in the soft versions of these stories. Padre Pio was not gentle about accountability in the confessional. He was gentle with the wounded. He was not gentle with those who came confessing half-truths or who wanted absolution without conversion. Multiple people recount being sent away from his confessional without absolution, not permanently, but until they were ready to be honest. One account, documented in Ruffin's biography and confirmed through the testimony of Padre Pio's longtime collaborator, Padre Pellegrino Funicelli, involves a woman who confessed to marital conflict, but framed every part of it as her husband's fault. She spoke for several minutes. Padre Pio listened. When she finished, he asked her a single question. "And what have you failed to give him?" The woman was startled. She began to protest. She had come prepared to explain her suffering, not to examine her own failures. Padre Pio did not argue. He simply waited. And in that silence, she broke. She said she had stopped praying for him, not dramatically stopped. She had just quietly shifted all her prayer energy to her children and her own spiritual life, and he had dropped off the list. Padre Pio's response, as she reported it, was quiet. He said, "When you stop praying for someone, you begin to see them with your eyes only, and your eyes will always find reasons to be disappointed." That line is worth stopping on, because what Padre Pio was describing is a spiritual mechanics. Prayer for someone keeps your heart soft toward them. Prayer holds open the space in which you can still see their soul instead of just their failures. When you stop praying for a person you live with, you reduce them to their surface, and the surface of any human being. Over 15 years and 3 children and a mortgage and aging parents and work stress is not always beautiful. The surface will disappoint. The surface is not the point. Prayer keeps you connected to what is underneath. And Padre Pio treated the cessation of that prayer as a serious spiritual event, not a minor omission. He said something similar to a couple who came to him together. This is one of the more unusual accounts, because usually people confessed individually. But this couple had traveled from Milan in the early 1960s and managed, through the intercession of the friars, to speak with Padre Pio briefly outside the formal confessional setting. They had been married 22 years. Their children were grown. And they had arrived at that stage of marriage that nobody talks about publicly, but almost everyone arrives at. The stage where you realize you are strangers who know each other's habits. You know what they order at a restaurant. You know which side of the bed they sleep on. You know their laugh and their irritations. But you have stopped knowing their interior life. You have stopped asking. And they have stopped offering. And the two of you exist in a comfortable, careful, completely hollow arrangement that looks like a marriage from the outside. Padre Pio looked at them for a moment. He then said, according to the account preserved by Father Joseph Pius, "You are both lonely, and you are each convinced that the other one does not notice." He paused. Then he added, "You have been right about that. Until today." The wife reportedly began crying immediately. The husband took longer. But witnesses said that by the time they left San Giovanni Rotondo that afternoon, something had shifted between them that had not been present when they arrived. This is the pattern in every account involving couples who came to Padre Pio. He did not fix marriages with advice. He fixed them by seeing them, by naming what was actually there. Because the deepest damage in a dying marriage is not the conflict. It is the invisibility, the feeling that the person who is supposed to know you best in the world has stopped looking. Padre Pio's gift was that he looked. And when someone who can see your soul actually sees you, something in you responds to that whether you are ready for it or not. There's a word Padre Pio used in his letters that translates imperfectly from Italian, but carries extraordinary weight: tepidita, lukewarmness. He borrowed it from the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 16, where God says to the church of Laodicea that because they are neither cold nor hot, he will spit them out of his mouth. Padre Pio applied this word to marriages with a specificity that was almost clinical. He said that lukewarmness in a marriage was more dangerous than hostility, because hostility at least acknowledges that something real is at stake. Lukewarmness is the state of having decided, below the level of conscious thought, that nothing is at stake anymore. And once a couple arrives there, once both people have quietly agreed that the other is not worth the emotional expenditure of genuine conflict or genuine tenderness, the marriage has entered a kind of spiritual hypothermia. The body is still functioning. The heart has slowed to almost nothing. He wrote about this in a letter to one of his most dedicated spiritual daughters, Raffaellina Carrassi. In 1914, a woman who was single and dying of a degenerative illness and who had consecrated herself to God. But the principle he articulated in that letter about lukewarmness in the soul's relationship with God was the same principle he applied to marriages for the rest of his life. He wrote, "The lukewarm soul does not sin greatly in any single act. It sins constantly by 1,000 small refusals. And it is the accumulation of those refusals that builds the wall. 1,000 small refusals." He could have been writing about any marriage that has gone cold without a single dramatic rupture. Let us talk about children. Because Padre Pio was relentless on this point in a way that his gentler interpreters sometimes soften into oblivion. He believed that the spiritual atmosphere of a home was a real thing. Not metaphorical, not psychological. Real in the same sense that temperature is real. And he believed that a home where the parents had stopped choosing each other was a spiritually cold home in a way that damaged the children who lived in it. Not just emotionally, in the way any family therapist might note, but spiritually, in the dimension of their souls. He wrote to one spiritual daughter in 1948 about her concern for her teenage son, who had begun drifting from the faith. She had asked for prayers, Padre Pio wrote back. He was kind. He was also direct. He asked her in the letter whether peace reigned in her home. Not surface peace, not the absence of yelling, but real peace. the kind that comes when husband and wife are united in genuine love and not merely coexisting in polite distance. He said, "Children do not learn faith from what we tell them. They absorb it from what we live, and what we live is always known to them, even when they do not have words for it yet." That letter, preserved in the 4-volume correspondence collection, is one of the more remarkable pieces of pastoral writing from the 20th century because it is so specific and so counterintuitive. The mother had been asking about her son. Padre Pio redirected her attention to her marriage because he could see that the root of the son's drift was not catechism class or peer pressure. It was a home that had gone quiet in a way that made God feel distant. The child had absorbed that distance and was now walking in it. 1962. A couple arrives in San Giovanni Rotondo from Germany, both practicing Catholics, both regular in the sacraments, married 18 years. Their marriage, from the outside, was devout. Mass every Sunday, rosary in the evenings, children in Catholic school. But inside the house, something was wrong in a way neither of them could name. Padre Pio, according to testimony preserved through the German Catholic press at the time and later incorporated into secondary accounts of his ministry, received the husband in the confessional and said to him almost immediately, "You are performing a marriage. You are not living one." The husband asked what he meant. Padre Pio said, "You say the prayers. You go to Mass. You are a good Catholic man. But you have not looked at your wife, not truly looked at her in years. You look at her role. You look at what she does. You have forgotten who she is." This distinction between seeing a person's role and seeing the person was one Padre Pio returned to repeatedly in his direction of married couples, because it is where the erosion begins, not in betrayal, not in cruelty, in the slow abstraction of a person into their function. She becomes the mother of your children. He becomes the man who pays the bills. And somewhere under those roles, the actual human being, the one you knelt beside at an altar and promised yourself to, becomes invisible. Padre Pio called this a kind of practical idolatry. A strong phrase, but his reasoning was precise. He said that God creates each human being as utterly singular, a soul that has never existed before and will never exist again, irreplaceable and unrepeatable. And when you reduce that person to what they do for you, or what role they play in your life, you have in some way denied what God made. You have taken the singular thing and made it generic. He connected this directly to the commandment against idolatry, saying that any time we replace the real thing with a substitute, even when the substitute looks similar, we have committed a kind of idolatry. The substitute in this case is the role, and he believed that spouses were called to resist that substitution every day. The resistance, in practical terms, looked like small things. Padre Pio was not romantic in the modern sense. He did not advise candlelit dinners. He advised prayer together, honest conversation, the willingness to admit weakness to each other, the practice of asking forgiveness quickly and specifically, not generally. He told one couple, whose testimony is preserved in the Padre Pio archives in San Giovanni Rotondo, that the most dangerous words in a marriage are not, "I hate you." The most dangerous words are whatever, and it does not matter, and I am fine. Because those words are how two people agree to stop being real with each other. And once that agreement is in place, Padre Pio said, it takes on a life of its own. Let us be direct about something Padre Pio saw in the confessional that almost never gets discussed. He saw couples who had turned their spiritual lives into an escape from each other. This is subtle and important. He encountered people, devout people, people who prayed for hours and attended daily mass and read the mystics, who had quietly arranged their spiritual lives as a separate world from their marriage. Their prayer was real. Their faith was real. But it had become, functionally, a retreat from the person they lived with. They were more intimate with God, or with the community at church, than with their own spouse. And Padre Pio considered this a serious disorder. He said that marriage was not given to us as an obstacle to union with God. It was given as a path to it, and a man or woman who uses God to escape their marriage is not using God at all. They are hiding. He told one woman, a daily communicant, a woman of genuine piety documented in the testimony of the women's group she led at the parish of San Giovanni Rotondo in the 1950s, that she was running from her husband into the church and that God was not accepting the offering. She wept. She protested that her prayer was sincere. Padre Pio did not dispute that. He said, "Your prayer is sincere, but you're offering God the part of yourself you find easiest to give. And you are keeping from your husband the part of yourself that costs the most." She was a good woman. She was praying well. She had simply arranged her goodness so that it never had to encounter the specific friction of her marriage. And Padre Pio saw that as a failure of love, more serious than many conventional sins, because it wore the disguise of virtue. That account changes how you read the whole landscape of his ministry to married couples, because what Padre Pio was consistently pointing toward is this: the love you owe your spouse is not the romantic love of the early years. It is not the feeling. Feelings pass and change and go cold in return. The love he was pointing toward is a choice that goes underneath the feelings, the choice to look, the choice to remain curious, the choice to keep praying for the specific person sleeping beside you and not just the generic category of your spouse, the choice to stay in the friction instead of escaping into something more comfortable. Padre Pio used the word fidelity often in this context, but he used it to mean more than sexual faithfulness. He used it to mean an ongoing faithfulness to the full reality of the other person, a fidelity to their growth, their suffering, their changing and sometimes difficult interior life. He said that a man who is sexually faithful to his wife but emotionally absent from her has kept only the smallest piece of the promise he made at the altar. And the rest of the promise, the part about genuinely giving yourself, about choosing the other person's good above your own comfort, that was the harder and more important part. And that was the part he saw failing, quietly, invisibly, in homes that looked perfectly intact from the outside. 1965, 3 years before his death. A priest brought a married couple to San Giovanni Rotondo, a couple who were considering separation, not for dramatic reasons. They had simply arrived at a place that many long married couples arrive at, and could not see a reason to continue investing in something that felt finished. They had not been cruel to each other. They had not been unfaithful. They were both tired, both certain the other had nothing new to offer, both quietly convinced that whatever had been between them was spent. Padre Pio spoke with them. The account, preserved in secondary documentation by the Italian Catholic publication La Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the journal connected to the hospital Padre Pio founded in 1956, describes him as unusually tender with this couple. He did not lecture them. He did not argue for the indissolubility of marriage in theological terms. He simply asked them a question. He asked each of them, separately, to tell him something they admired about the other person. They both struggled. They both eventually found something. And then Padre Pio said, "You are both still here, in each other. You have simply buried it under years of looking at the surface." He then told them that what they were calling a dead marriage was not dead. It was sleeping under exhaustion and habit and the accumulated weight of years of small failures of attention. And he told them that what they needed was not a separation. What they needed was to begin again, not to pretend the years of coldness had not happened, to begin again with the actual truth of what was in front of them. That couple did not separate. Their testimony was gathered in the late 1970s as part of a private collection of accounts submitted to the Padre Pio Beatification Commission. Cold morning, September 23, 1968. Padre Pio died at 2:20 in the morning in the room where he had lived for 50 years. He was 81 years old. At the moment of his death, the wounds of the stigmata, which had bled constantly for 50 years, closed. The skin was intact, smooth, as if the wounds had never been there. 3 days before his death, he had heard confessions for the last time. The canonization was declared by Pope John Paul II on June 16, 2002, in St. Peter's Square in Rome, before a crowd estimated at 300,000 people. In the homily, John Paul II described Padre Pio as a generous dispenser of divine mercy, particularly in the sacrament of reconciliation. But what the crowd that day perhaps did not fully register is what that mercy looked like from the inside of a wooden box in a small friary in southern Italy. Over 60 years of listening to the specific damage that quiet, well-dressed, ordinary human abandonment does to the people who chose each other before God, and then, slowly, in the 1,000 small ways available to us, chose something easier instead. The hospital Padre Pio built, the Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the House of Relief of Suffering, opened on May 5, 1956, in San Giovanni Rotondo. It has grown to become one of the largest hospital complexes in southern Italy, with over 1,000 beds and medical staff from dozens of countries. Padre Pio raised the funds for it over 30 years of letter writing and personal appeal. He described it as his mission to heal bodies alongside souls. What is less known is that, in the early years, he insisted on the inclusion of a marriage preparation program and a family counseling structure within the hospital's pastoral care wing. He believed that the suffering that brought people to hospitals was often connected, at its root, to the suffering happening inside their homes. The archivist at San Giovanni Rotondo in 2009 cataloged over 800 written testimonies from couples and individuals who credited specific advice from Padre Pio, received in confession or in correspondence, with the saving of their marriages. 800 documented cases. That is not a metaphor or a generalization. That is a specific number from a specific archive in a specific town in the province of Foggia, in the Apulia region of southern Italy. And here's the thing about those 800 accounts that deserves your full attention. Almost none of them describe dramatic rescues from dramatic crises. They describe small pivots. A man who started looking at his wife again instead of through her. A woman who started praying specifically for her husband by name instead of generically for her family. A couple who started confessing to each other, not just to a priest, the small daily failures of attention and care that had been accumulating like dust on a surface no one cleaned. The damage Padre Pio saw when couples stopped choosing each other was real and serious and spiritually significant. But the repair, in case after case, began with something almost embarrassingly small. The decision to look, the decision to name what was true, the decision to stop performing the marriage and start living it. One of the 800 accounts submitted by a woman from Naples in 1972, 4 years after Padre Pio's death, describes her final confession with him in the spring of 1968, 6 months before he died. She had come carrying a marriage that she described as a stone around her neck. 25 years, 4 children, a husband she had not spoken to honestly in a decade. She sat in the confessional expecting judgment or advice. She got a question. Padre Pio asked her, "When did you last tell him something true?" She could not remember. He told her that was where she needed to start. Not with grand gestures, not with confrontation, with one true sentence, one honest word offered freely, without defense and without agenda, to the person she had promised herself to 25 years ago in a church in Naples. She said she left the confessional feeling lighter than she had in 20 years, not because her problems were solved, because she had a place to begin, and because Padre Pio had given her the sense that the beginning was possible, that something which looked closed was not closed, it was waiting. He saw the damage, he also saw the door. The two things were always present in what he said about marriage, because that was the shape of his entire theology. Darkness and the light that the darkness has not overcome. The wound and the healing that was always already present at the edge of it, waiting for a single true word. A single turned eye, a single choice to begin again on a Tuesday morning in a kitchen in Naples or Milan or Munich, 25 years in, with children grown and the romantic feeling long since gone and nothing left except the covenant, the actual living thing that the wedding day only pointed toward. The stigmata on Padre Pio's hands closed on September 23, 1968, and left no scar. The doctors who examined his body in the hours after death could find no trace of the wounds that had been clinically documented since 1918. 50 years of wounds? Gone overnight. What the medical report, signed by Dr. Giuseppe Sala, could not explain was how tissue that had bled continuously for half a century showed, at death, the smoothness of unbroken skin. The report, filed with the Vatican and included in the canonization documentation, describes the skin as that of a young man. No scarring, no residual tissue damage. The wounds appeared to have been, in the medical language of the report, completely reabsorbed into the body, the couples who stopped choosing each other and then started again. Their accounts read the same way. Not as if nothing had happened, not as if the years of coldness could be erased, but as if something that had been marked, wounded, closed, had been reopened and healed in a way that the surface alone could not show. From the outside, you could not see it. From the inside, it was the only thing you felt. That is the last thing Padre Pio had to say about it, not in words. In the body they found on the morning of September 23rd, 1968, with its inexplicably smooth hands, in a friary in a town of 20,000 people on a mountain in southern Italy, 50 years after the wounds first appeared, and on the morning they finally closed,